All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for a little bit of the show. Today, we have a special guest with us. We're going to have Zach. Hey, Zach. What's up?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Zach.
Thanks for having me.
Nah, no problem. Thanks. Our topic today is data-driven insights with Endpoint Analytics. So you were the first person I thought of to have on the show. So appreciate you joining. Watching me and Steve pretty much embarrass ourselves on live TV or internet nowadays.
Hey, I'm right there with you. Happy to be the third person embarrassing themselves.
All right, so just a quick intro for those that haven't seen the show before. My name is Danny Guillory. I'm a senior program manager on the Configman team, and I'm responsible for all cloud attach. Steve?
I'm Steve Thomas. I am on the customer.
And all right, he'll be back. All right, Zach.
Alrighty. Zach Dvorak, program manager on our Microsoft Endpoint Manager team, specifically focusing on endpoint analytics.
All right, thanks. Yeah. So intros are done. Steve will be back in a second once he realizes he lost connection or something. So Zach, tell me a little bit about this overview pane when it comes to analytics. What am I looking at here? How does one decipher this information?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best place to start is, let's talk a little bit about why we built endpoint analytics in the first place, right? And really, I think what we started here, and in this, we obviously meet with customers regularly, and we have forums like back in the day. We used to have the in-person conferences like Ignite. We've got all of our online forums now. And one of the things that common theme we kept hearing for the last several years is, a lot of IT departments were starting to take a close look at the end user experience within their organizations. And it's one of those things where, historically it's always played second fiddle to things like security or compliance and, making sure that devices are protected, corporate information is secure. And what we found is that throughout the years, as companies start to tack on more and more of these, sort of required configurations, software, just different items, whether it be a security application, whether it be, some sort of identity, VPN, as you add more and more to these devices, you're degrading the end user experience. And in many cases, it had gotten to the point where end users were frustrated, their devices were almost unworkable. And so that's sort of why we created the endpoint analytics solution, was with an eye toward the end user experience, really to help give IT pros sort of a sense of whether they are helping their end users be productive or perhaps getting in the way. And so when we look at the overview page here, we're really looking across all of the different areas that endpoint analytics considers. So currently that's going to be startup performance, our recommended software, and then application reliability, which is in preview. And of course, over there on the right-hand side, you'll see the insights and recommendations. And this is really meant to be sort of a prioritized list of best actions that IT pros can take in order to improve the end user experience all up.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the things I really love about this overall screen is how I get the recommendations, how I get baselines. The baselines are super impactful just from a perspective. I remember having, change management conversations and things like that, and people poking holes through the various methodologies I would use to come up with data. But it was so impactful to be able to get a snapshot of what my analytic experience looked like before and after, right? So if I patch it on Patch Tuesday, hey, I can go and say after Patch Tuesday or 7 days after, say, hey, here's the impact of that patching to our environment. So baselines are hugely impactful, like, to some of the customers I work with, and would be hugely impactful to me if I was back then on the other side again.
Absolutely. I think one of the great things about the baseline concept, right, is, we often hear this sentiment that, IT doesn't necessarily feel like they have a sense whether what they're doing is helping, right? We need to know if the actions that we're taking and all of the things that we're doing are getting in the way or they're actually moving the needle forward. And there are certain things where, certain taxes we have to pay, right? Security is always going to be paramount to organizations, right? So we might have to install a new security application on devices, and that may come with a user experience hit. But when we look at the baseline concept, we can start to quantify exactly what that impact is, and then we can look for areas where we can sort of reclaim that end user experience hit from that required application. So I totally agree with you. I think the baselines really put everything into context and really help you quantify what it is that you're doing on devices.
Right. One of the mysterious things here, I'll tell you, I got a lot of questions about, and I want to hear it from your mouth, right? Because I have my way of telling it. But what's this little caret here? So the little gray caret right there in the middle, where baseline 50. Yeah, explain that to me, out of your words.
Yeah, so the little caret there is basically just the marker for the baseline that you have selected. So right now, if you look up into the top right there, your baseline that you have selected is that all organizations median. And so over on the score, just below where you have the green bar, we've got the Endpoint Analytics score for your tenant, which is a 72, and then we have the baseline with a 50. And so the gray caret is supposed to be the visual representation of that 50 baseline. Now, if we were to select a different baseline, looked like you had several in there, so let's just go ahead and grab one.
I want to pick this one because I knew it was bad.
Well, there you go. So notice that the little gray caret is going to slide up to about an 85 because in your baseline that you selected, that VIP baseline, the baseline score value here was an 85. Now notice a couple other things that changed on the screen when we did that. The bar went red, so our score is now red instead of green, and that's because this particular score today, the 72, represents a regression from that baseline of 85. And then you'll also notice right above the score bar, we have that little icon that popped up that says needs attention. If your score regresses far enough, I believe it's over 10%, then we'll put that needs attention banner up there to basically alert you to the fact that your Endpoint Analytics score all up has regressed more than 10% from the time that you took this baseline that you have selected.
Gotcha. That's really good feedback. And this is kind of the one thing I like to show customers. Like, this is that before and after picture, right? I would say I'll probably do a snapshot before a lot of things in my environment, right? Before patching, before installing agents, before making group policy changes or other cloud policy changes. But ideally, driving with data, right? Kind of the topic of the whole episode, right? Data-driven decisions, right? Not just putting your finger in the wind, figuring out which way things are blowing, right? So super impactful. And just sharing another story, like one of my customers, I remember Startup Score was one of the first things you guys came out with Endpoint Analytics. And it was super exciting with one particular customer because what we realized is for a whole hour, people would do nothing. They would take their laptop or device out of their bag. They would press power. They'd go get coffee, walk around, socialize, talk about movies, TV shows, go to the store, come back, and then log in, only to wait another 30 minutes. So, a lot of customers, when I was talking to them about analytics when we first started, it was, hey, it's you guys don't have a lot there yet, but what we have is super valuable, right? And helping them understand that vision, understand the things that we are intending to drive with that analytics, has been mind-blowing. And again, still super jealous of customers because when I was an IT director, I didn't have this. It was Excel spreadsheets. Hey, how do you feel today? How's your computer working? Man, it was rough times. So it was.
That's exactly right. If there's one key takeaway for Endpoint Analytics that I like to hammer, it's the goal here is really just to help you quantify things, right? And to your point, the actual reason we went after startup performance first, right? It sounds like a simple scenario, but we were at a conference a couple years back, and we had an IT pro come up to us and ask if we had any sort of tool to assist with startup performance on devices. And we're like, well, no, it's not really something we've considered. And internally at Microsoft, we don't necessarily deal with a startup performance problem, right? I'm accustomed to my device booting quickly. I can log in quickly. So it didn't really resonate with me initially. Well, then he told me a story, kind of what you were describing, Danny, where his users would come into the office in the morning, and they all had desktops, so they were sitting at their desk, type in their password, and then they'd go make a cup of coffee, wander around the office. So it would take 5 or 10 minutes for that device to log in. And this IT pro was particularly concerned about this, not from an end user experience perspective, but from a security perspective, because all of a sudden we have users who have authenticated their, typed in their password, pressed log in, and then left their desk for an undetermined amount of time waiting for that device to log in. And so it really is one of those scenarios where, I sure hope that for most IT pros, it doesn't resonate with you because it's not a problem. But endpoint analytics can definitely, help you quantify and determine, is this something that we might need to drill into? And if so, what can we do to improve the situation?
Yeah. Yeah. So I just realized I didn't click in the startup score, so I clicked in, and one of the things I'll tell you is super impactful. Like another customer I talked to back when we were going to the office as an EDC, I talked to a customer that was doing through PC refresh, right? And as they were going through their PC refresh, what they're doing was I asked the guy, I was like, hey, how are you doing your PC refresh? What's your methodology? How are you going through that? And the one thing he said was, I'm just looking at an Excel spreadsheet, checking out the old stuff, and then whatever's the older stuff, I will, prioritize that first. So as I got to, have more deeper dialogue with him, this really came up and it really resonated, because as I had my thought process, I was telling him, hey, what if you did that PC replacement based off of the worst performing devices, right? So when I thought of the analytics, it was like, great, let's go look at model performance, right? If you look at model performance, you can see the worst performing devices. And it may not be that the model is performing badly. It could just be a misconfiguration, but that's the analytics tells you the right place to go dig, instead of, oh, what's happening in help desk this week, last week, how do you feel today? Did you have a good drive to the office today, right? It's a whole bunch of driving by data instead of just, random data points.
It's such a good point. And I think one of the things that's a little surprising, or it's interesting, that we've learned with endpoint analytics, right, is different devices, different models will behave differently in different environments. Right, so based on the configurations you use, the software that your end users are using, the different policies and settings that you have applied, different models are going to behave differently. And so, one of the things that you'll see more and more of in endpoint analytics is sort of this focus on device-centric performance metrics. So right now we've got, startup performance, application reliability, but you'll see us more and more start to look at all of these things across a particular device or type of devices to help you make exactly those decisions you just called out, Danny, right? I'm going to replace some devices. Which one should I replace them with? That sort of thing.
Right. Steve, glad to have you back. I guess you had some technical difficulties. Glad to have you back. Tell us about, I know you still talk to a lot of customers, as well as you're a soundboard for a lot of peers. So what are you hearing from your customers related to startup score, startup performance, and the whole, just that piece of the analytics puzzle?
Well, it's funny because someone just asked a question in chat that's very similar to some of the questions I'm getting from customers, like, when will endpoint analytics start to point to the specific GPOs that may be slowing down the startup performance?
Yeah. So trying not to segue too much, but check out the first episode where we talked about group policy transformation. We talked about group policy analytics and things you can do there. As far as endpoint analytics, Zach, do you got anything to add about that type of data? I don't know.
Yeah, it's it's a question that we get quite a bit, and not to sound harsh, but the answer that I would give is probably never, right? Because it's a bit off message for us to get to the level of specific GPOs that are causing issues, right? Mm-hmm. If you're serious about improving startup performance by tackling GPOs, I'll go back to Danny's point, right? We have group policy analytics. We have tools that can help you migrate to the modern methods for device policies and compliance. But starting to cherry pick specific group policies and removing this, removing that, you're really just, it's more of a Band-Aid solution than an actual fix to the problem.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I don't want to dig too much into the one specific question, but just like top of mind, right? And then we'll move on because there's other things obviously we want to talk about. But top of mind, like if you're concerned about group policies being that impact for you, let me switch back to the demo right quick. When you look at the startup performance, you can actually see here if group policy is one of those things that is slowing your performance down, your startup performance down. So now I would look at the different signals that you can put together, right? When it comes to, hey, I think group policy is slowing me down. Hey, here's the data to go prove it. Now, once you prove it or disprove it, then you can go to the other analytical solution, policy analytics, to kind of see what that impact is. Maybe I have some misconfiguration, log on, log off scripts, then the device is not even there, so it's waiting on the timeout. Putting the different signals together helps you figure out how you want to tackle it. So hopefully that answers the question or gives you a beginning of a methodology to get to, hey, how do I solve the problem?
And that's a good point too, right? I think there's also a lot to be said about the fact that let's drill in and make sure this is a problem before we go to solve it. Right? I see another question here in the chat window where if we already are using AAD policies or we're using modern desktops and we don't necessarily have group policy objects in place, then the time that you see in endpoint analytics is really just telling you how long is the device spending evaluating group policies. Oh, there are none. Moving on, right? So it might have 1 or 2 seconds showing there, but if it's not a problem that's worth going after, then at least you have that information in endpoint analytics so that you can know where you focus your time.
Right. All right, I can waddle in this mud forever, but I want to get to some of the other parts of the analytics that is super important and super valuable to our customers. So another thing I love to talk about is proactive remediations. I absolutely love proactive remediations because you know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of the old school Microsoft Help It tool, Fix It tool. Man, all types of automations that I did from configuration items with remediation, automatic remediation, but now that's just rebirthed into the cloud. So I really love it in a sense, right in my lab here. Switch to the demo right quick. See, I don't have anything, so I'm going to jump to the PowerPoint so I can actually show you some screenshots of some of the things that we had on the screen. So Zach, good screenshot of some things that I found from one of our other tenants, that test tenants at least. Give me kind of a breakdown of what I'm looking at here. Like, what are the different columns? Give me a breakdown.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, proactive remediations is just a super powerful sort of framework, is the way I like to think about it, right? We got the handful of scripts that are going to be built into the tool, but as you can tell in this screenshot here, this looks like a tenant where the IT pro has actually gone in and started authoring a whole bunch of custom scripts as well. And so, it looks like, we've got at least a dozen scripts in here in various states. Some of them have been deployed, some of them are not currently being deployed, others are active. And basically what we're seeing as we go across this table here is these scripts, they can be configured in different ways. If you drill in, you can understand how they're being deployed. But basically, we've got 2 phases for each of these scripts. There's a detection phase and a remediation phase. That detection phase is going to be part 1, which is going to run on devices and attempt to determine if the device is in some sort of a known unhealthy state. And so those are those first 2 columns with numbers there, the without issues and with issues. So when we run that detection script, how many devices came back and said, nope, no problem? How many devices came back and said, yep, this issue is present on the device? And then if the IT pro has configured the second part of the script, which is that remediation part, it will automatically run and attempt to kick the device out of that known unhealthy state. So basically to remediate. That's where those other columns come in. So we'll show you how many devices the issue got fixed on, so the remediation was successful. How many devices we were able to fix the issue, but then it ended up recurring. And then also the total number of remediated devices overall. And so these are just sort of ways to track the success of these scripts here. It looks like if I go down to that 3rd row from the bottom, it looks like that's a good example of a script that was very successful. And we see 81 issues were fixed and only 14 recurred. If I go a little higher up, about 5 or 6 down, I see sort of the opposite, right? Here's a script where we had 23 issues fixed, but it recurred over 200 times. So maybe there's something we can do differently in terms of that script, or maybe we need a stronger fix. And so it's really just that feedback loop to make sure that these scripts are doing what we expect them to do. And of course, fully customizable. So, the IT pro can go in and continue to make edits and adjustments to make sure these scripts are having the impact that they expect.
Right. Steve, what have you heard from your customers, working with your customers and with other peers that talk to you about this proactive remediations piece?
They want more of them. They love the built-in offerings and they want dozens more. In fact, we've got some questions about that in the chat as well. When are we going to include more built-in ones?
Right.
It's a good question.
Zach, I'll let you have it there first. I have my opinion, but you go first.
Danny, I have a feeling we have the same opinion here. So it's a good question, and it's one of those things where if I talk to 100 different customers, I'll get 200 different answers about what kind of scripts they want to see. Right. And so there's sort of diminishing marginal utility in terms of the value to each customer for scripts that we publish. It's important to remember that proactive remediations is a framework, right? And so what we don't want to do is clutter your tool full of hundreds of scripts that may or may not apply to you. So one thing that you'll see in the future is we're working on making it easier for you to pull scripts that are authored by community members, so other IT pros, even ISVs, IHVs, OEMs. People can write scripts for their software, for problems that they face, and then share those out with the community, and you'll be able to pull from those and use them in your environment. We're already seeing a whole bunch of MVPs and other IT pros publish proactive remediations that they've written in their own personal blogs, for instance. We want to make that process a little more formal for you. And I think that's going to be what you see us doing moving forward, because at the end of the day, it's very challenging for us to write scripts that are going to apply broadly to everyone. But there's certainly a lot to be said about pulling from sort of a community resource instead of having 100 different companies write the exact same script over and over again.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, you hit all the same points I was thinking of. I guess from when I was a customer, I used to ask Microsoft for a bunch of stuff, and as well as all our customers do. I guess just thinking, who knows my business better, right? Microsoft or me? So maybe Microsoft provides some frameworks, some recommendations, but what I really want Microsoft to provide detection and remediation for my environment, yes, no. I mean, it's a double-edged sword either way, right?
Yeah, and it's just to kind of close the loop on that point, I think if especially when we're talking about third-party applications or device driver issues, right? The ISV, the OEM, they're going to know their system a lot better than we are, right? Yeah. So if they can be the ones to write that script and then you can pull it on demand as you need it, that's what I see as the right framework there.
Yes, absolutely. Let's see. You had a great articulation I heard about a customer you had talked to that used, I want to say, proactive remediation for some notifications. What was that story about? Like, can you share a little bit about that? I thought that was super unique. I would have never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's it kind of goes back to the point that proactive remediations is a framework, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it, right? When we built it, we had a certain sort of narrow idea in mind about what it was going to be used for, and a whole bunch of IT pros have sort of blown our minds in terms of what they've done with it. And I think the story I think you're talking about, right, is we had a customer that sent us a script that they had written where they were basically using the built-in Windows toast notification feature to pop up a little notification to users if there was certain situations on the device where they needed that user to contact the help desk, either to file a warranty claim or to replace some sort of component in that device, or even simple things, right? Like one IT pro used it to notify users that, hey, we got a really important security patch and we really need you to restart your device. Could you please do it? Right? We don't want to force it on you. And so it's one of those things where the scripts are PowerShell scripts, right? And you can do a lot of cool things with PowerShell. And so, we've seen a lot of IT pros get creative with it. And like I said, a lot of them will freely publish the scripts that they write on their blogs or elsewhere online. So it's been really cool to see kind of how IT pros have taken the feature and run with it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting on the things that as we develop them, what the community turns out to do with them. It opens our eyes in various different ways, right? All right, so talk to me a little bit about application health. Like you birthed this great tool. I love it. I know the customers I work with love it. Tell us a little about app health. What's some feedback you're hearing so far, and where do you think this is going to go?
Alrighty, yeah. Application reliability. This is a big one. This is a feature that is still very much in its infancy. We released the public preview, I believe, about a month ago in early March. So we're starting to get a lot of good feedback, from what customers are seeing in this feature here. The goal with this is we're trying to shine a light on. We use the term reliability. We're basically looking at crash and hang events. So we're looking at objective metrics of application issues related to desktop applications. Now, you heard me use the term objective issues there. When we think about where we want to take this feature in the future, I see a couple questions in the chat window about this as well. We also want to start to incorporate some of the more subjective issues with applications. Right, so right now we've got you covered when user calls into help desk and says, "Hey, Outlook keeps crashing." Right. What we don't yet have visibility into is when users call in and make reports like, "Hey, my computer's running really slow whenever I launch Chrome," or whenever I'm browsing the internet, the pages never load. Right. Those more subjective issues, that's something that we're working on shining a greater light on, where we'll be pulling some resource performance data, looking at things like CPU memory spikes and trying to correlate those with negative end user experiences as well. Some of the other things that we're going to have. Oh, go ahead, Danny.
Nah, I was just going into the next slide where I had some data where we can see the different applications. You want to give me a little bit of breakdown here?
Yep, you're one step ahead of me. That's right where I was going to send you. So as we drill into the feature today, what we have is, at an executable level, all of the applications that we're seeing in your organization. Now we're focused on foreground applications with usage, right? So these are going to be the apps that are crashing right in front of the end user's face. We're really looking at, which applications are having the greatest impact on the end user experience and their productivity. And so we're going to show you across your application estate, total number of active devices. We always look at a 14-day window. So we'll look at the total number of devices that have at least launched that app. We have the total usage duration across all of the devices in your estate. And then things like the number of crashes, what we call the mean time to failure, which is sort of our way of normalizing the crash rate across different applications. So that allows for more apples to apples comparisons. And then we will also give you an app reliability score, which is basically going to be related to both how frequently that app crashes, as well as how much it's used. So in other words, applications that are heavily used and crashing frequently are going to have the lowest scores because they're the ones having the greatest impact on your end user's experience. And then vice versa, applications that are heavily used but very stable, those will have the highest scores.
Right. Steve, how much have you been doing with this app health so far? Like, what are you hearing from peers and customers?
Well, it's funny because one of the first questions I always get is, how much do I have to bump up the telemetry requirements in my organization? So how about that, Zach? What are the telemetry requirements for app health and endpoint analytics?
It's a good question, and it's a question we get quite a bit. And it's it's an interesting assumption that the telemetry is required, because the short answer is no telemetry is required for anything that you see in Endpoint Analytics. So the data is all going to be collected through your management tool. And so when we have Configuration Manager, we're using that computer agent that's already on the box. When we have Intune, we're using the management extension to collect this data. So no telemetry required there. You can have it all the way down, completely off, and you'll still be able to get all the insights that you see in Endpoint Analytics.
Awesome. All right, there's so much more I want to get into, but I don't want to consume everybody's day. I'm sure everybody has other things to do besides sitting here and listen to us ramble about analytics. I do want to get to some Q&A, but I want to spend 2 minutes, 5 minutes talking about the other cool thing, the latest thing that I've seen you guys put out.
Yeah.
Smart performance. This is super exciting for customers. So I don't want to steal any thunder. Zach, have at it. Go for it.
No, this is a good one, and this is a great example of where one of the things that we work really hard to do on the team here is to make sure that we are delivering features that are sort of complete and holistic. I think the analogy that we like to use on the team is the whole Henry Ford back in the day, his faster horse analogy, right? Where a lot of times when we talk directly to customers, they'll ask for a faster horse, right? And we really want to kind of take what they're saying and turn that into how do we build them a car, right? And so this was born out of countless requests for more blue screen information. And what we realized as we started to do research on blue screens is that while blue screens are a very visible problem for a lot of companies, it's actually disruptive to end users anytime a device restarts, right? And so we wanted to give a complete picture of how frequently devices are restarting and what's causing those restarts. So you'll notice here we break restarts into 6 categories. And roughly speaking, there's the unexpected ones at the top, there's the expected ones in the middle, and then unknown at the bottom. So when I say unexpected restarts, those are going to be things like the blue screens, as well as equally important is what we call a long power button press. And this often gets ignored by IT because it doesn't manifest itself as easily. But this is where an end user, their device might get frozen or locked up. They get frustrated and they just hold down that power button until the device restarts. That is also an unexpected disruptive restart, right? If the user has resorted to holding down that power button, there was probably a major issue with that device.
Yeah, I did that this morning.
There you go. And I'm sure you didn't just do it for fun, did you?
No, I didn't. Cool. Give me a little bit about this chart down here.
I just recently had to do that, like 10 minutes ago.
I guess so, Steve.
And so this
Zach,
chart does.
Tell us a little about this chart down here.
Yeah, absolutely. So this chart down here, we're looking at 2 things. So we got the blue line at the top, which showing me the % of devices that have restarted over the past 30 days. And so this chart is interesting because it's going to show us spikes in restarts for our devices. And so we'll be looking, like if you notice here in the middle of that chart there toward the end of March, it looks like we dipped down to about 50%. And then since then we've climbed back up, which typically we would expect this number to be close to 100% because we're rolling out a monthly security patch, right? And if this number dips too low, like it did toward the end of March there, then that might be cause for concern because that means 50% of our devices haven't restarted in the past month. And so they may be behind on their patching. They may not have the latest fixes applied. Now, the orange line at the bottom, this one's also going to be super critical because this is looking at the average number of restarts per device. And so what we often hear from customers is we've seen a huge uptick in blue screens lately, or we've seen a huge uptick in customers reporting devices freezing up, they have to restart. This is a great way to sort of stay out in front of those trends. And if you start to see this value creeping up, then we can go up a little higher on the page and drill in and see, all right, why are these devices restarting? Where are we seeing an increase? And we can drill in from there.
Gotcha.
Now, one of the things I do want to call out, because I see a question over here in the chat, and I also get this question quite a bit. I get the question of, all right, if we go back to the top of this page, and it tells me that we have, X number of devices with blue screens. So it looks like we have 1/3 of our devices have a blue screen, and our average is 1 per device. Well, how do we know which devices those are, or which devices have that blue screen? And it's actually in here already. So one of the things, we'll take that feedback and we'll make it a little more discoverable because we do get the question quite a bit. But if you click over to that device performance tab up at the top, There we go. Yep. You'll notice we've added a column over there on the far right for the number of blue screens in the last 30 days. So you can actually sort that. And it looks like in this case, we got one machine that's had 2 blue screens. And if I click in and scroll down, I'm able to see on a restart by restart basis what's causing these problems. And so in this case, it looks like we've had 3 in the past month or so, 2 of those in the last 14 days. And we can see the stop code as well as a failure bucket ID when it's available. So in this particular device's case, we've had 3 blue screens across about a week, the 23rd through the 28th, and they all had a different stop code. So that's interesting. So it's not the same problem that just keeps recurring on this device. And we can, click in to drill and see exactly what, if there's any more information available about what these particular stop codes are. And this is just going to take you to the bug check page. So just to, kind of get you started on troubleshooting so you can understand how that stop code maps to a particular issue.
Yep. That's super interesting. I guess the thing I want to make sure our audience takes away is that analytics is going to really help you understand insights in your environment. I'm sure you say, all 3 of us may say it a different way, but when I'm talking to customers, even if they don't want to use Endpoint Manager, I implore them to turn on analytics, especially, Steve, you know this just like I do, you've been on the CAT team, most customers have the solution, just don't even use it. But once they enable it, having the insights into your environment is super important, valuable, powerful, helping drive change in your environment. The analytics I take like as this, when I was in the military, used to have the see something, do something. Well, this is kind of the same thing, right? It's like, hey, I see something. I can't act like I don't see it now. Now, hopefully you choose to resolve those things with Endpoint Manager. But, if you at least turn on the analytics, you can get super powerful insights about your environment and various different pieces, connecting dots like we talked about earlier with, hey, analytics shows me group policy. Which policy? Well, go look at the other signals that we have across the cloud estate. So super powerful, super impactful. I love when customers light up and connect those dots like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll echo that point, where if nothing else, you enable Endpoint Analytics, you will learn something, right? And,
absolutely.
And it's so fun for me just to see, a lot of IT pros have long-standing assumptions being challenged when they're finally able to see the data, right? I think a lot of companies just assume, well, startup performance isn't a problem for us because nobody calls them the help desk about it, right? Like,
right.
My device boots fine, so we don't worry about that, right? Analytics is a great way to sort of challenge those assumptions. And you know what? If you're right, great. Now you have the data to prove it. But if not, now you know where your opportunities are.
Steve, what's been top of mind for your customers with analytics when they ask you about analytics? Besides privacy, where's my data? I'm sure everybody asks that at some point and they go off the cliff on it. But besides that, like, what's a super exciting thing for your customers?
Well, we're getting some questions related to scope tags in the chat. And
great, let's hit them.
So scope tags is a big ask from customers, mainly for more granular visibility. Another ask is for customers who like to build their own dashboards. And again, we had a question in the chat about that. What about leveraging this stuff via log analytics for customers who want to build their own custom dashboards?
Yeah, they're good questions. And so the short answer is that today we have pretty much all the data in Endpoint Analytics is publicly accessible via the Graph APIs. So you can query Graph APIs to pull your data out of Endpoint Analytics. We've also obviously got export buttons all throughout the tool. So if you're looking at a particular table and you want to play around with that data in Excel or in a different format, you can just click that export button. The log analytics question specifically is a good one, right? Because I think that sort of enables more streaming data, right? So instead of querying an API on demand, you have the data flowing in. You can populate a dashboard. You can set up alerts, that sort of thing. It's something we're exploring. Don't have any announcements I can make yet, but it is something that we do want to enable, right? Because we absolutely see the value in being able to create sort of those custom dashboards and alerts.
All right, let's spend maybe 5-10 minutes on Q&A. I know we answered some questions while we're chatting, but Steve, anything else that is super sticking out in the chat that we want to answer here on
Well,
the show?
I'm getting a lot of good ideas here, Zach. Lots of good ideas here. The one that sticks out is getting user sentiment through this tool. Like, you know, are you happy with your experience? Rate 1 through 10, taking user pulses as a possible feature. That's good feedback.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that we do have on our backlog. It's a little challenging in the sense that, you know, the sort of the I usually say it as a joke, but it's not a joke. Our primary goal with Endpoint Analytics is we have to make sure that, you know, in collecting all of this data about the end user experience, we are not degrading the end user experience, right? And this is where I think a lot of third-party tools tend to go a little too far, right? Is if we look at the impact that the tool or the agent has on the device, well, it's actually contributing to a lot of the end user experience problems. And so we've been very intentional about making sure that the data that we collect is as small as possible, and that we collect it at specific times of day, and do the upload only when resources are available. So we're very conscious about the impact we're having on end users. And so it's something where we do want to be able to sort of, you know, I mentioned some of the more subjective metrics. We want to be able to get proxies for those, but we also do want to be able to incorporate direct end user sentiment as well. It's just a matter of making sure that we can do it in, you know, sort of a quiet and non-intrusive way.
If I'm already a Microsoft 365 E3 customer and I'm using all Windows 10 enterprise devices, do I need any additional licensing for Endpoint Analytics?
No, so if you're an M365 E3 customer, you're good to go. So Endpoint Analytics as a tool is included as part of your EMS license, your Config-Man Intune license. And then the only exception to that is going to be the proactive remediations piece, which is going to require Windows E3 or higher. And so that's, you know, just sort of the complicated nuances of the different pieces of the tool. The simple way to put it, if you're M365 E3, you've got everything you need for the whole tool.
I got a question from a Microsoft person, Matt too. Any plans to add info related to RAM config, average usage to Endpoint Analytics? I know I've heard that question before, but Zach, let you have it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it, you know, kind of goes back to the point we made for application reliability, right? We do want us to sort of bring some of those more subjective indicators of user experience into the tool. And so I don't have specific timelines that I can share, but we do have plans to bring resource performance insights into different aspects of the tool, both in a sort of device metadata sort of way, right? So currently in startup performance, we look at hard disk drives versus solid state drives. We want to be able to provide additional pieces of metadata to help you draw comparisons between populations, but also from a, you know, resource utilization perspective, right? So is there a particular application where every time I launch, you know, Chrome, for instance, it's spiking my CPU, that sort of thing, right? So
right.
I had to use a fake example there, but you know, there's definitely more that we want to do in that space, and I think, you know, possibilities are endless.
Good. So let's take 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up the show, because again, I don't want to waddle in this mud and take up everybody's time, because I love these conversations. I like hours conversations with customers about this. One more question, so I'll pick one, and then Steve, I'll let you pick one. There was one question about, will there ever be an option to scope specific group of devices with the EA data? I'm sure you get that one a bunch.
You guys are going to get me in trouble with all these roadmap questions. So it is something we want to do in terms of, you know, allowing you to filter and sort based on, you know, sort of arbitrary device properties or your AAD groups, config-man collections. We do want to enable filtering. it's actually a wildly challenging technical problem, because a lot of the insights that we show are based off of massive amounts of data that are, sort of aggregates that are pre-computed. And when we start working with arbitrary groups, we can't really pre-compute data. So something we want to do, I don't have a timeline I can share, but definitely hear the feedback. We get the question a lot, and it's certainly value in the ask there. So we'll keep working on it.
Yeah, it's a frequent ask. I know I get it a ton. I mean, I gotta give the exact same answer. Like, it's something we want to do, but how we do it is very challenging because the amounts of data, various other things we have to consider too. So, Steve, did you get one more good question for Zach?
Yeah, what about our desktop analytics customers, or more specifically, our co-managed customers who are trying to decide between desktop analytics and endpoint analytics because they're looking for app compatibility reporting? Should they go ahead with desktop analytics for their co-management environment, or should they wait for this in endpoint analytics, perhaps?
So a couple good questions in there. The first thing I would say is, I know desktop analytics and endpoint analytics tend to kind of be conflated, and the reality is that they're completely different tools, right? And I think the answer to your question really depends on what the specific company is looking to, gain insight into. Desktop analytics is going to be specifically focused on application compatibility in the context of a Windows update. So if you're still on Windows 7, I hope not, but if you're still on Windows 7 and you're looking to move to Windows 10, desktop analytics is for you. If you're struggling with Windows 10 feature updates, keeping Windows 10 current, and primarily specifically due to application compatibility, desktop analytics is your solution there. We'll dive deep into all your applications, including the custom ones. We'll make sure that there aren't any compatibility issues that need to be addressed, that sort of thing. If you're more focused on the end user experience and you want to make sure that you're giving your end users the best experience possible, not necessarily in the context of a Windows upgrade, just day to day, that's where endpoint analytics comes in. So the solutions certainly are complementary, right? So for large corporations that have application compatibility concerns, definitely encourage them to use desktop analytics in the context of their feature updates. And then for organizations which are focused on the end user experience, which, spoiler alert, should be everybody, that's where endpoint analytics comes in, right? And so you will see certain insights that sort of look like they overlap, right? Like, for instance, the one that always gets called out is the application health, right? In desktop analytics, we show some crash rate comparisons from before and after Windows upgrades. Endpoint analytics, we're focused on the application reliability overall at any point in time. So that's sort of the primary difference there. In terms of the question of, should we wait for certain insights to appear in endpoint analytics? We don't necessarily have any plans to bring desktop analytics like features over to endpoint analytics, right? Desktop analytics is our solution for Windows updates. Now, if there are, one thing that we do have conversations with customers about quite regularly, we often get the request for desktop analytics for Intune only devices. I will spare Danny the trouble of having to hear me go over this explanation again as to why I don't think that request really makes a lot of sense. But we can table that for next episode maybe. But we do love having the conversation with customers around, if there are specific aspects of desktop analytics or specific pieces of the application compatibility question that you'd like to see more insights on for your Intune devices, let's have that conversation, and then we can explore ways on our end of how we can incorporate those asks into endpoint analytics, into endpoint manager in general, or even into Windows Update for Business, right? Our goal is to bring you the insights in the most relevant place, not necessarily, just because I own the endpoint analytics, not necessarily just shove everything into endpoint analytics, right? So happy to have those conversations, but in terms of the specific, do I do desktop analytics now? Do I wait for endpoint analytics? It depends on what you're looking to get out of it.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks again. I'm going to start to wrap up. I want to make sure that I share, here are some links. The PowerPoint that I showed has a bunch of good links. I'll make sure I post that on the blog that follows up the video. But hey, Zach, thanks a bunch. Appreciate the time, the partnership, friendship, basically everything that I can tell you thank you so much. Same for you, Steve. You've been a great partner. You know, keep doing these sessions with me, embarrassing ourselves on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I feel like I talked a lot today. So if you guys ever want a little break from having to talk for an hour, feel free to have me back.
We'll do, Zach. We'll do. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.